What's up, guys? Welcome back for another EVE Online video. Today we're going to be discussing combat and how it relates to kind of mining industry. I'll talk about kind of like my history with it, kind of like how I use combat ships for my operation and why I think it can benefit a lot of people to expand their fleet, their repertoire, their utility in getting into some of these ships, right? Now, when you first think about combat, offense, defense, in terms of mining, the first thing you think about is drones. And that is true, right? Your primary way of killing NPCs or doing anything like that is with your drone skills. I tell newer players and people who are building mining tunes to work on drone skills right after you kind of get your yield and your ship skills where they need to be, navigation, all that stuff. Because when you're out in high-sec rats are not really a problem. They're very easy to take down even with light combat drones. But when you start getting into things like nullsec, belt or systems that have asteroid belts where you do get anywhere up to battleships on these anomalies, it helps to have really good drone skills. But it shouldn't really stop there as a miner. What you should do is look into getting like a combat ship or an alta that can do that, and that's a quality of life improvement more than it is a necessity. In this video, what you're seeing here is a Tengu, and it is clearing the rats from a large Marcoxite anomaly. We're going to talk about kind of my observations in terms of Marcoxite in nullsec and why I think that getting into something like a Tech 3 cruiser is highly beneficial. Now, a lot of the times you're not necessarily going to be undocking these combat ships, right? Especially if you're in nullsec where there's no asteroid belts. Like for me, a lot of the systems I operate in do not have asteroid belts, so I can take the prospect out or anything out into the ice belt and I won't get NPC rats. But that hasn't always been the case for me. Now, if you don't know a little bit of history of me, but when I first started playing, I was quickly, kind of indoctrinated into a mining corporation. That was kind of my major focus. The mindset in those stereotypical mining corporations was you trained into your mining ship, you got the best yield possible, and any NPC threat was dealt with what we call a drone ball. And what that essentially means is you have one person who would have a target painter on, and then everybody would launch their drones and assist the target painter person, and then that person would just paint targets and all the drones would just go in this huge ball and take things down. That's a great way to take care of rats in nullsec as a group. When you start doing like solo mining and solo mining fleets, you're responsible for like launching all those drones, doing all those things, multiple steps, and then also sucking them all back in and making sure you don't forget anything. That can be a little tedious. That's why a lot of people who are in advanced industry will, when they're done, there's no more mining skills to train. When there's nothing else to do in terms of drones, they start training alts or hauler alts or even sino alts into doing combat ships so they can put them out there either cloaked or just sitting around the fleet, and they can take care of those rats, those NPCs, without really having to do anything to disrupt the mining ships, which is great. Now, I've been on like a covert ops kick for a while. If you've been watching the channel, then you know that right now in nullsec I'm using endurances and I'm using prospects. Anything that allows me to covert cloak or like just cloak in place to stay out of trouble, which works great. I carry the full suite of covert ships with me on my when I kind of move around and stuff. So right now I'm using the Tengu. I'm also using the Buzzard. And both those are covert ops capable ships. And there's some crossover there in terms of like utility. The Buzzard I carry around so I can scan when I get into the game every day. Whatever system I'm about to mine in, I go and I try to scan any anomalies out there, make sure there's no wormholes. Kind of just get like a lay of the land. That task can actually also be controlled and can be done with the Tengu. But the Buzzard also allows me to do like covert ops cloak if I need it for any other ships. I would say if you don't have bigger ships that require like a sino, you probably don't need something like the Buzzard. If you compare my scanning skills on the Tengu to the Buzzard. The Buzzard's going to have more sensor strength, so that's why I usually take it out. It has a little bit, it's faster to get around with its prop mod, so I do like having both of those ships. But we're going to talk about why you need kind of a Sino alt in your later stages of mining too, and it all kind of feeds back into why you need, to start thinking about combat ships to enhance your mining day-to-day activities and stuff. Once I kind of going back to story time here, once I kind of broke out of the stereotypical mining corporation and kind of went out on my own, a lot of people I knew kind of did the same thing. We started actually getting into, training combat ships, whether it be like the Golem or, dreads and stuff like that. Now, why would a mining focused, an industry focused player train into a dread? Why would we train into things like golems if we're not ratting, or like marauders? For golem is just a Kaldari version of that, or like even Tengus. A lot of it, the Tengu and like the golem and stuff, that's just like what we're doing right now. We're clearing anomalies. Now, these Mercoxian anomalies, they're they got like 15, or so rats on them, which is kind of a lot. I mean, if you take a mining fleet in there, you can take everything down relatively quickly. You're going to take a little bit of like shield damage and stuff, but the battleships are going to be kind of difficult for like Hulks or like even Mackinaws or even a Porpoise or whatever to take down in a respectable amount of time. That's why I always just like take the Tengu and clear the site, and then like the Prospects is kind of like, free to do whatever it's got to do, and the Tengu can kind of go off and dock and do whatever. And then going back to like the dread question, it's like, why are these advanced mining players even investing into doing dreads? And that's because NPC capital ships. If you've been playing long enough, if you've been in nullsec long enough, you know that there is a chance for you to see a NPC capital ship come on grid with you. There is a chance of seeing an NPC dread come on grid with you. Even NPC titans can show up. We train, and by we I mean like people that like me and people I know who are advanced industry people, we train into dreads to combat those situations. If I'm out there and I see a dread or a rat carrier come on grid, then I go off, I get in my dread, get in a carrier, get in a support golem or something, we come out, we clear it, and then we go back to business, we go back to mining, and that's utility. There's also things to be said about other support ships too. Like when you start getting into things like the Rorqual and you're maybe like sieging that thing, having a force auxiliary ship to help support that is important. And there's a lot of crossover skills that you get if you've already been conscious and you've already been training into like combat ships to improve your quality of life. A fax isn't that far off when you start getting into the area of like training into a pilot into being a Rorqual. And it's kind of like how it's done too, right? When you're running like a Rorqual, fleet with a bunch of Hulks or something, unlike running an Orca with a bunch of Hulks in like high sec, or even on moons in null sec, or even like a Porpoise and a bunch of mining alts, you have to kind of go a step further when it comes to Rorquals, because they're very, very juicy targets. Normally, the configuration for a fleet for me would be the Rorqual, which is sieging, not necessarily using drones, but sieging to get the bonuses, and boosting like a bunch of Hulks and just going crazy with yield. We also will have a Sino alt in another system, so if something happens and we can get out of siege and not be tied down, we can jump out of system to safety. That's a backup. But then also I usually have a fax, a force auxiliary alt, sitting somewhere nearby so that it can support the Rorqual in terms of trying to like break tackle, or that time when it's we're trying to get out of siege and kind of prep up for that escape Sino. So when you get to that level, then it is you don't want to get to the point, if that's your goal, is to get up to like doing something really advanced like that, you don't want to get all the way up to that point and then be like, okay, I got to start from zero on a lot of these alts in terms of getting gunnery skills and missile skills and combat ship skills and stuff like that. You kind of want to start working on that as it goes. Priority usually goes for skilling on mining and industry is you get your mining ship, skill as high as possible. You get your navigation stuff in as well and good as possible. Magic 14, you're doing hull and armor. You're doing your shield skills. You're doing your drone skills. When you start doing your your combat stuff a little bit, that's like drone damage, their velocity, their durability, all that. And then you start kind of, bleeding into the refinery kind of side of things where you start training into crystals and being able to get more yield when you reprocess stuff. Once you kind of reach to that point and you start running out of things to, realistically train to kind of help you, a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of people, just kind of like start training whatever. It doesn't really stop there. You start training into like a combat ship to help your quality of life. You start training an alt, thinking about an alt even a year in the future to be a FAX, a Force Auxiliary pilot. Start training those Sino alts and stuff so that if you do get to the point where you're ready to do like a Rorqual fleet, you have kind of all that stuff already in play. And to kind of like, bring this video kind of full circle a little bit, we're going to talk about these Mercoxit anomalies now. With the recent mining changes, and in the area space that I'm in, I've noticed that a lot of Mercoxit anomalies go kind of untouched. Now, at first, me being me, and like I love doing research, at first my observation was like I see a lot of these anomalies, they still have rats on them, they go untouched for a very very long time. I was like, well, maybe it's like a market thing, maybe something has happened with Mercoxit that and people are not interested in it. But then I go and look at the market, or I reference my experience in offloading the morphite that I export out of JITA or export to JITA, and I don't see it. Like, Mercoxit is still a very very valuable commodity to be mining. What I did notice though, and I kind of ran a little test like a week ago or so, is I kept seeing all these Mercoxit anomalies. There's like 4 different kinds. There's like a small, an average, a large, and like an enormous. We're on a large right now. So I would notice that like I would go to a system, I'd see one of these, I'd fly to it, there'd be rats on it. And that was like more often the case than not. And it kind of got me thinking. I was like, well, let me bring the Tengu in here. We'll clear this of rats and we'll see what happens. And on a couple of occasions, when I take a combat ship in there and I clear all the rats, then slowly the Alliance members in the area will start trickling in and start, mining the site out. And they kind of told me that a lot of people who are into mining and industry don't really have the inclination, or maybe they just don't have the training to go and clear it themselves. They're in this like codependent relationship where they ask somebody in the Alliance or they ask somebody in their corporation to go clear it, but in the large part they're kind of reliant on somebody else to like get those ready to be mined. And what I like to tell my viewers, what I like to tell newer players and people getting into mining, try to be as self-efficient as possible. And that's why even just getting the Tengu trained out is a very very big investment, time investment, but you're leaving a lot of ISK on the table by not mining these sites out there. For instance, today we spent 10 minutes clearing all the rats, and then the prospect can sit here for the rest of the day and just chew up this thing if no one else kind of comes and does it. Every trip out with the prospect is like 20 million in the uncompressed value. Once we kind of get the final, once we pull everything, we compress it all in system, and then when we get it all back to our home system, we'll, refine it and see how much morphite we get. But in most cases, it doesn't matter, right? Like, that stuff's going to get immediately exported because it's just so juicy. So that's kind of what triggered the idea for today's video. I really wanted to, like, kind of talk about the importance of starting to think about combat ships. It doesn't have to be a Tengu either. They've even used things like a Rook. And a Rook is interesting. It's a Caldari ship. And it's an interesting ship because it doesn't show up on D-scan. I used to sit a Rook on a anomaly with me. It doesn't have a cloak or anything, but like unless you've taken unless the person, like, unless a ganker in like Highsec or something has scouted you with a cloak ship, then they probably wouldn't even know it was there. It was very interesting. Like, even taking like rooks into like wormholes are very interesting too, because you can kind of like freely move around and not show up on D-scan. You don't show up on local. Those are really nice. I've also used things like a Raven, a battleship. They don't have to be a battleship, really. Like in Highsec, you could get away with just a frigate, just a small Tech 1, combat frigate. And when you had that training done, it can protect, it can deal with rats and stuff. And then it also can do like low-end rat sites. Like I said, high-sec rats are not really like a concern. A Venture with 2 light drones can take care of the stuff out there. It's really when you start getting into other areas of space that you really have to start thinking about improving your combat capabilities. But that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully I've given you some insight and some things to think about when you're looking at new things to train or new things to improve with your setup. Let me know in the comments what combat ship you like to use, and what kind of like situations you feel combat ships are beneficial in the industry kind of perspective and everything. And even just like outside of mining, like just going out and just ratting with these ships, sucking everything in with like a mobile or MTU, and then salvaging it all with scrap metal processing is a good source of a variety of materials and stuff. And also rigs. If you're building rigs, you kind of need a combat ship so you can go out and salvage these NPC wrecks and get that stuff that's needed for that. So I think in terms of like the wider kind of industry wide kind of focus, combat ships are 100% something you should be focusing on. But I appreciate you guys for watching. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to get notified of new EVE Online content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.